With me now to discuss from the Daily Signal, Jarrett Stepman. Jarrett, good to see you. How you doing?
Good to see you too, Liz.
All right, Jarrett, talk to me about this. I think it's funny, by the way, that elected officials, which we always need to remember are our representatives, we elect them to represent our interests. They took this action suggesting that Washington, D.C. remove the names of these founding fathers, and then when the people found out, they tried to hide what they were doing.
Yeah, it's pretty telling when, of course, their intention was quite clear when they added all of these names to this list, saying that they don't currently represent the values of Washington, D.C. And I will say that maybe the one thing they got right in this whole thing, I think George Washington does not reflect the current values of Washington, D.C. But really, honestly, the Washington, D.C. government should be ashamed of itself, going after these statues, going after the namesakes, both namesakes of the city, Christopher Columbus and George Washington. One wonders what exactly the name of the city is going to be if they actually got their way. If Mayor Bowser on this commission actually was able to push through and actually remove some of these monuments, which I think is beyond belief, but really goes to their mindset. I mean, you're absolutely right that when we warned years ago that this was a slippery slope, that the real goal and intent was to undermine the founding of this country, to undermine 1776, the people, and of course, the ideas that undergirded this country from its beginning. That was the real target from the beginning. You know, these debates over this historical figure or that one, it really doesn't get to the crux of the matter. The crux is they think that the United States was born of something that was awful and terrible. They think the United States is irreparably racist. And I think that narrative is completely false. They need to essentially hide the truth so that they can promote my truth, their truth, what they think is the reality. I think it's a very misguided one that Americans see through.
Well, Americans certainly do see through it. I mean, you should have seen the backlash, obviously, that caused the D.C. mayor to remove that page from the document. I am under no, I have no doubt that she intends to continue with this agenda. She removed the page, not her goal of removing these statues. But there's a reason that we need to recognize why politicians liberal politicians try to erase history. It's so that people believe what leftist politicians tell them. You talk about this idea that America is fundamentally bad, that it was built only on racism. The reason that narrative is not only false, but the reason it's so dangerous is because it's used as the premise to tell people that their violent rioting is justice, that, it's justified. They're allowed to do that because the institutions that made our nation are illegitimate based on our founding. And the reason for that is so that these leftist politicians can usher in Marxism. This is part of their strategy. It's a fundamental part of their strategy. And conservatives, I think, let this go too easily.
They do. I think what's really galling about this whole concept that these statues make people feel unwelcome or unsafe. I have to say, I live in Washington, D.C. This is a city that's been hit by riots, been hit by property destruction. Of course, many have seen the videos of mobs harassing people on the street. That's what's making people feel unsafe. It's not these old statues. It's not the Washington Monument. It's not the Lincoln Memorial. It's not the Jefferson Memorial. The people from around this country come to every year to come see, to come reflect on. This is a rebuke of America's founding ideas for a city that wants to become a state. Washington, D.C. has been pushing for statehood for years, saying that, we require equal representation in the Senate. Well, this is the same D.C. that now wants to rebuke all of American history. I think Americans should think about that when you hear appeals from Washington, D.C. saying that they require representation in the Senate. It's a complete farce, and I think this whole episode has revealed what D.C.'s leadership is really about.
Right. Why would you want to be part of a country when you claim that you hate the country? It's a little contradictory. The other thing is it's really important for people, and students especially, because they're not learning this in the school system, to understand that American history, there are good parts of American history and there are bad parts of American history. This is not a nation that is without sin, without stain, without flaw, without mistake, without even deadly error, without, injustice. Of course it is. There is the good and the bad, but that's the difference between Marxism and reality. Marxism believes that their ideology of Marxism, communism, socialism will erase the sin of human beings, and they simply can't do that. The reality is the fact that some sinful men 200 years ago who committed some heinous acts against other human beings also created the freest, fairest, most powerful, most prosperous country that the world has ever known, which has lifted the most people out of poverty and given more people opportunity and liberty than any nation in the history of the entire world. And the two things, being a sinful person and creating something that has allowed people to flourish, is not mutually exclusive. That is what it means to be a human being.
Yeah, and I think that's the problem with this idea of purification of the past, this iconoclasm. I think it gives us a false notion of what humanity really is. I think a lot of these people have a mistaken belief in human nature. They think that human beings are perfectible, which I think is complete nonsense. I think human nature is something that is ultimately fixed. Mankind is fallen. What is so great about the founding and what the institutions created by the founding fathers, which makes them so miraculous, so successful, is because they had an understanding of human nature. They created institutions that were strong at its root and allowed for improvement in the future. The sins that America was born with were done away with over time because of that system of self-government that they created, a system that had checks and balances, that gave power, finally, sovereignty to the people of this country. That's the beauty of the United States. Not that it was perfect when it was founded and born, but it was built on a solid foundation that has continued to score victory after victory. This is a country that went from 13 colonies at the edge of the world, in 2 centuries became the greatest nation on earth, a beacon of hope and liberty for people all over the world who flock to our shores to enjoy that system, people of all different creeds, all different races. That's a marvelous and wonderful thing. That's something that should be celebrated and studied. We should want to know why this country has been so successful. I don't think the radicals who pushed the mayor to make this proposal, I don't think they understand it. I don't think they want the American people to understand that. They want to know it's their way or the highway. If you don't go along with our views of social justice and wokeness, we're going to cancel you, we're going to erase you for our perfect, glorious future.
Right, using the rights and the freedoms and the liberty and the prosperity that was born because of the government created by the men whose names they want to erase off of the federal buildings. It can't be more contradictory, but fortunately people are calling D.C. government elites out for this. Jarrett, thank you for being on the show. I appreciate your analysis.
Thank you, Liz.